Hi, everyone. We have a ton of information to cover in Chapter 6. We're going to talk about Islam and its development as a world religion and as a competitor of Christianity. And by the end of this chapter, you'll be able to identify some of the similarities and differences, not just between Islam and Christianity, but we'll throw Judaism in there as well. Also, in this chapter, we're talking about the Carolingian Renaissance and how the Catholic Church, the Pope, became ruler of some lands. So we'll be talking about the donation of Constantine. And also we'll be talking about feudal society and, oh my gosh, so much stuff. So much stuff. So let's get started. I'm going to call your attention to some video links in the slides. As always, the slides are attached separately for you without the recording as well. So please go back to those and listen to the links or watch the videos that I've embedded. With the exception of this first one, you don't have to for this one. This is one of my favorite songs by They Might Be Giants, I think is the name of the band. Istanbul, not Constantinople, the song. Anyway, love this song, especially for this chapter. So let's kind of get the picture set. Germanic invaders were penetrating the Roman Empire, and as they did so, they adopted parts of Roman civilization. Now, the Germanic kingdoms, as we've talked about briefly in the past, were rural, and because of that, they really didn't grasp or understand these Roman concepts of, cities and this whole the whole empire kind of relationship. So they shifted the kingdoms to what they knew, which was a rural economy and rural culture. Excuse me. Raids by Germanic tribes and Muslims, Magyars, and Vikings devastated libraries throughout the Roman Empire. So we lose a lot of this ancient Roman knowledge that had been protected for so long. Much of Roman law disappeared in that as well. Some people sought to preserve Greek philosophy and mathematics and the application of reason to religion, and to preserve classics with copied manuscripts. And so I just wanted to show you this map here, and you can adjust it on your screen as well so you can see more of it. Excuse me, let me go back to it, or less of it. We're talking about, the people coming from Hungary and coming into these areas. Let me show you specifically the area we're going to be talking about a lot today, Constantinople, right down here. It's an important port city. Down below you have the Mediterranean Sea, but up above you have the Black Sea. And there's just a little sliver in between where Constantinople and Optimalion are, so that this is a very important port because people can get to it from the Black Sea or the Mediterranean Sea. So the medieval East was also known as the Eastern Roman Empire. The ancient Greeks actually called the settlement Lygos. But beginning in about 660 BC, and for more than 900 years, the urban area was known as Byzantium. The Emperor Constantine made the city the capital of Eastern Roman Empire in 330 and named it in honor of himself, Constantinople. So at some point, the local Turks started calling the city some variation of Istanbul or Stambul. So, that's where we get the name Istanbul, Constantinople. When the Ottoman Empire actually collapsed in 1923, Turkey officially changed the name from Constantinople to Istanbul. Okay, so Constantinople was important, like I mentioned earlier, because of its place as a port and access to people from the Black Sea and the Mediterranean Sea. But it also served as a fortress city. It was Christian. It was a Christian fortress city. It was Greek in culture, but Christian in religion. And it preserved a lot of wisdom of the ancients, and it was very much still Roman in government. So where much of the Roman Empire had been lost, Constantinople still maintained the Roman aspect of that government. In 1054, Christianity split into Roman Catholicism and Eastern or Greek Orthodox churches. At the peak, under Emperor Justinian, who reigned from 527 to 565, the Byzantine Empire included Greece, Asia Minor, Italy, southern Spain, parts of the Near East, North Africa, and the Balkans. So quite large. And we can go back to that map so you can see that. All this area that's in brown. Rather large area. Okay. Contacts with the Byzantine civilization actually stimulated learning in the Islamic world and to Latin Christendom as well. So the Byzantine culture stimulated learning in both the Islamic and Christian cultures. It served as a bulwark, which I've already mentioned as a fortress city, but a bulwark is a defensive wall. And it was a defensive wall against Islam as a Christian city, and very important, as I've mentioned, to culture and trade. One of the neat things that comes about from trade is that you get to see new things and new interesting things, especially as you visit these port cities. And the richness of Islamic culture really started to show up in Christian churches as well. So these arches here are very much Muslim in design, but also ended up in Christian churches. So let's talk briefly about Islam. You do have a video to watch about Islam for this chapter, so please do watch it. Actually, maybe 2 videos, I think, about Islam. Very important to see that because in the United States, we seem to be so much more familiar with Christianity as a world religion, and a lot of times we don't consider Islam as such. And really, there are some similarities and some differences. I want to go over a few of those. So Islam was established by Muhammad based on Allah's revelations. Now, Allah means God. So the Islamic Empire was a theocracy. As a theocracy is where all human activity works to the benefit or glory of the church or the religion. And that's what Islam is and was. The standards of morality and rules for daily life were set by the Quran. And there are 5 pillars of faith. We'll talk about those in just a minute. But Islam united the Arabs and created a vast empire. Islamic civilization creatively integrated Arabic, Byzantine, Persian, and Indian cultural traditions. So very much a melting pot of culture in the Islam development. By the 11th century, Arabs began to lose their dominance in the Islamic world. So here, usually when we say 5 pillars, the first thing people think about are, 10 commandments. Islam has 5 pillars. Christianity has 10 commandments. They must compare somehow. It is really not a good comparison. Let me just tell you what they are, and you can see why they're not a good comparison. First of all, we've got the 10 commandments numbered 1 through 10. No other gods, no false images, not to use God's name in vain, to keep the Sabbath day holy, to honor your parents, not to kill, no adultery, don't steal, don't false witness, and do not covet. The 5 pillars of Islam are the Shahada, which is there is no God but Allah and Muhammad is his messenger. So there is no God but Allah. Okay, there are no other gods. There we go. Salat are 5 obligatory prayers. These 5 prayers are done every day at dawn, midday, late afternoon, just after sunset, and before midnight or right before bedtime. So those 5 obligatory prayers are said by everyone. And if you're at work, you stop what you're doing and you do the prayer at the appropriate time. So that's what we mean by theocracy, where everything about the culture revolves around the religion. The zakat is a systematic giving of money Now, in Christianity, you probably hear that referred to as tithing. And tithing generally, in terms of Christianity, is like a 10% expectation. With Islam, they ask for 2.5% to be given to the poor, not to the church, which is what we generally hear these days, at least, in terms of tithing, tithe to the church. And then the church would then disseminate that either to ministry or to expenses for the church or to the poor. A lot of churches have food pantries, clothing ministries, that sort of thing. So anyway, so we have Islam giving 2.5% of their income yearly to the poor. Number 4 is the Som. It's pronounced with the long O. And it's basically during the 30 days of Ramadan, there's no food, drink, smoking, or sexual activity during the daytime. And then the Hajj. And I really want you to see this video about the Hajj because it's incredible to see. It's the pilgrimage to Mecca in Saudi Arabia. So Islam wants people to make this pilgrimage at least once in their lifetime. Of course, not everyone can make that, and that's not a problem, as this video will explain, but it's incredible to see this great pilgrimage, so be sure to watch the video. Okay, so we've talked about this as far as how so much of the learning had disappeared as the Germanic invaders came in and raided the Roman Empire. And I mentioned earlier that there was an attempt to hold on to some Greek manuscripts. 2 of those people who worked to do that were Boethius and Cassiodorus. Boethius was actually an Italian noble. Early in the Middle Ages, there was this cultural drought, and Boethius really wanted to revive classic intelligence. So he translated some of Aristotle's works into Latin, and then he wrote commentaries about other philosophers. Until the 12th century, Boethius's works were really all the world knew about Aristotle. He wrote articles defending the combination of reason and faith, and his book, Consolation of Philosophy, is a philosophical thesis on fortune and death. It remains very important today as one of our remaining literary works of the Middle Ages. If you take a literature class in your future, you will probably read at least part of Consolation of Philosophy. Cassiodorus was also Italian, and he collected Greek and Latin manuscripts. So he kind of helped start this monastic practice of duplicating and preserving classical texts. We've talked about that a little bit. One of the roles of the monks was to copy text, because monks were people who were literate, so they could do that. So they copied text and to preserve them. Isidore was Spanish, and he compiled an encyclopedia. He got information from both secular and religious sources. There were a lot of errors, but it was a huge undertaking and very impressive for being the first of its kind. So now we're back talking about Christianity. So the church, the Christian church, was a shaper of the medieval civilization. Christianity is the glue that actually held it all together. Like I mentioned, the monasteries helped to preserve Christianity and intellectual tradition by copying those texts. The monasteries of Ireland and England, because of them, the tradition of learning persisted. And in the 6th and 7th centuries, the Irish and Anglo-Saxon monks actually became chief agents for converting people in Northern Europe. So not only are these monasteries now preserving intelligence, they're actually going out and converting people to Christianity. Pope Gregory I was a very important figure in strengthening the papacy, and he used Roman methods of administration to organize the papal property very effectively in Italy, Sicily, Sardinia, Gaul, and other regions. So in the early Middle Ages, let's talk about the kingdom of the Franks. Clovis united the Frankish tribes and conquered most of Gaul. We're talking the area now that we would think of as France-ish, if that kind of helps put things into perspective. Charles Martel stopped the Muslim advance into Europe at the Battle of Tours. And Pepin forged a strong alliance with the Pope, with the donation of Pepin. And we'll talk about that in just a minute. I know that's just a lot of stuff to drop on you. So, the papacy had been cast out of the Roman Empire by Pope Gregory. In 739, the Lombards take Ravenna, and Pope Zachariah crowns Pepin the Short as the new king. In 754, Pope Stephen II meets Pepin to ask for help, and they make a deal with the Franks. These are the most powerful people. They're the Carolingians. Why are they called Carolingians? Well, because I mentioned Charles Martel, like in the last slide. Charles Martel, that was not his name. That's the Americanized name that we refer to him as. His name was something like Carolingus Martellus. So Carolingian refers to him. Okay, so that's where we get that name, Carolingus from Carolingian. The Pope confirmed the sovereignty of France to the Carolingians and blessed the family, which restored the papacy's lost territory to the Pope. Let me explain this a little bit better. So this was based on the donation of Constantine. This donation of Pepin was based on the donation of Constantine. So let me tell you about that. The donation of Constantine was a legend that dated back to the 5th century relationship, actually between a different pope, Pope Sylvester I and Emperor Constantine. We know that Constantine converted to Christianity, supposedly at the hand of Pope Sylvester and based on a dream that Constantine had. According to the legend, Constantine was very sick with leprosy, and he had a dream in which two men appeared to him. So the Pope was called to help heal Constantine. Now, at the time, one of the treatments for leprosy was to be treated with the blood of babies. Can you imagine that? Anyway, so Pope Sylvester goes to Constantine at his time of need, and Constantine says, "Who are these two gods named Peter and Paul?" Because these are the guys he's seeing in this dream that he has. And Constantine, asked the question. Pope Sylvester says, "Oh, Peter and Paul are not gods. They're disciples." And so he witnesses to Constantine about God. And he baptized, and Constantine converts to Christianity, is baptized, and is cured of his leprosy, according to legend. Okay, so in exchange for this cure and the introduction of Christianity, Constantine then says, I'm going to give you a donation. I'm going to give you supremacy over all Christian churches. That's just not the ones, where he is. That's in all the world. So how he can do that, whatever. But anyway, I'm going to give you supremacy over all Christian churches. You are the pontiff of the Holy Roman Catholic Church. You're over the lands. So he gives them land. The lands of Antioch, Alexandria, Constantinople, and Jerusalem. And over all the churches in the whole wide world, like I already mentioned. And this donation made all clergy then patricians. Additionally, the alleged donation made the honor to Pope Sylvester inheritable. So that meant that he could pass it down to the next pope and to the next pope. You see how that goes. Okay, so the main significance of the donation of Constantine is that it granted power to the pope to engage in civil affairs. Now the pope has a kingdom of his own. Pope Leo III crowned Charlemagne emperor of the Holy Roman Empire on Christmas Day, and it was important for several reasons. For Charlemagne, it meant that the church gave him sanction to its rule. So they shared power, basically, is a good way to say that. For the Pope, it meant that the Catholic Church had the protection of this growing empire, the most powerful ruler in all of Europe. And that was important because the Pope had long been challenged by people who were fighting for the kingdom. So we have kind of this virtual share of power going on. People say that Charlemagne really didn't want to be crowned by the Pope, but the ceremony did give him a degree of additional credibility. So it was important to him for that way. And the empire, what goes up must come down. We talk about that all the time. So Charlemagne's empire did break down because of internal disunity among his grandsons who inherited it. See if I have some information for you about that. Yes, a little more information about that. Let's talk a little more about Charlemagne in detail. So Charlemagne was Charles the Great, also known as Charles the First, and he ruled most of Europe from 768 to 814, becoming king of Franks in 771, and the first emperor of Rome later in the Holy Roman Empire in 800, as we've mentioned already. Charlemagne was skilled in military strategy. He was viewed as the father of Europe. He ensured the survival of Christianity. And that, again, goes back to that tie with the protection of the church. So if the Pope crowned the emperor, then the emperor would be obligated to protect the church. So also, he was diplomatic. He promoted education, culture, and athletics. He had lots of wives and upwards of about 18 kids. He encouraged their education, and he prohibited his daughters from marrying while he was alive. He gave money and land to the church and protected the popes, which was what was expected of him. So the Carolingian world, this is what we're talking about here. I'll let you look at this map. You can see the color coding and key there. So you can see the areas we're talking about. Let me go back here. So this, as Spain, would have been Islamic. So this area, to be Christian, is a good stronghold for Christianity. So now let's talk about feudal society. Feudal society was the system. It was a Germanic tradition, like we said, when the Germans came in, the Germanic tribes came in and overtook the Roman Empire. They really kind of replaced it with the thing that they knew, which was this swearing of loyalty to someone. And when you swear loyalty to a lord, you get a fief in exchange, which is like a payment for your loyalty. So the king was the chief lord. Okay, so the king of a village, whatever, chief lord. But you have these people who own land, right? So these landowners then become lords. That's where we get the word landlord from. So we have a landlord, and if you're going to live on this lord's land, you have to make a vow of fealty to him. You have to vow your service to him. So we would have then these warriors, these knights, who were dedicated to the code of chivalry, which basically means protecting people, honoring the laws of the church, and to fight for Christianity and to fight those who oppose God. And I will also give you a separate slide that shows you a little about how this works. But women at this time were subordinate to men, but when their husbands couldn't be there, they very much ran the manors. And even at times, as this tapestry shows, medieval ladies sometimes joined their husbands' hunting parties. The economic foundation of feudalism was manorialism. They were an agrarian society based on agriculture. Peasants provided labor and produced goods that supported the system. Lords provided the protection to the peasants or the serfs that lived on their manors. Lords exercised control over the lives of the serfs. They were bound to the land, and the serfs could not leave the manor without the lord's consent. Open rebellion was rare because the lords possessed so much military and legal power. So it really kind of reinforced the system without a lot of rebellion going on. So during the High Middle Ages, we have an agricultural revolution with some new technologies that include this 3-field crop system of rotation that could improve the crop production. So like if you had a large field, you would produce like a third of the field would be planted and harvested in the spring. Another third would rest, and then the final third would be planted, harvested in the fall. So you're always giving a piece of land time to rest, and by rotating that, you got better soil nutrients and that sort of thing, and you could produce, year round pretty much. Food was plentiful because of this, and when food is plentiful, population increases. So that was an important result of economic expansion during the High Middle Ages. This also revived trade. The increased agricultural production, increasing political stability. People had money in circulation. There were international fairs that helped revive commerce and encourage travel. We don't think a lot about tourism at this particular point, but it was there. It's kind of part of it. Advances in business techniques included partnerships and underwriters. Banking and credit instruments also kind of start to grow at this time, which brings about the growth of capitalism as well. Formulation of commercial law defined rules of conduct for debts and contracts. So we do see things starting to kind of revive at this point. Towns were reborn, and they had also, increased food, which allowed urban society to rebound, and the middle class begins to expand. The merchant guilds started to organize to regulate and control town life. Women actually were really active in economies of towns. They were active as craftsmen. Craftspeople, artisans would probably be a better word. All right, so they were active as artisans. They made pottery. They sold produce. They helped manage the markets, that sort of thing. But they also were very active in purchasing, and going to town was a big deal. So it was a social event as well. Townsmen obtained charters to expand self-government, and the existence of these towns and these markets really helped loosen the holds on the serfs, because the lords didn't necessarily want to go do all the shopping and the market stuff. So it sent the serfs. So the serfs are getting a chance to get out. And towns, because of that, they really kind of challenged the features of this feudal society and became agents of change. Because now the more you have people interacting with each other, the more ideas can exchange. It's called cosmopolitanism, and we've talked about it already this semester. So the rise of states. We're going to just hit some of these very quickly here. England was unified by William the Conqueror in 1066, which fused the existing Anglo-Saxon systems with continental feudalism. This evolution of common law and the Magna Carta in 1215 really kind of helped to establish respect for law and basic liberties. And the Germanic tradition of kings seeking advice of leading men and nobles was preserved and expanded. That's one of the good things that came out of the feudal society. This whole idea of a landlord and a king. The landlord would be loyal to the king. The knights would be loyal to the landlords and to the king, and the serfs were loyal to the king, to the landlord, and to the knight or the person over their manor. Anyway, so it kind of created the system of getting advice from other people. In France, the French kings launched a prolonged process of gaining power, and it was Louis IX that began the precedent of issuing laws without consulting the vassals first. So now we start seeing France is actually moving away from vassalage, this feudal society, and he's starting to take absolute control. And in Germany, unity in Germany was stymied by the struggle between nobles and the kings, and the German kings with the papacy. So let's talk about the growth of papal power. Gregorian reform. The Benedictine monks of Cluny led this reform movement. There was a college of cardinals that was instituted to select popes. Pope Gregory VII wanted to improve the spirituality of the clergy and free the church from, outside and secular interference. It was Gregory VII that insisted that bishops, though, be appointed by the Pope, which leads to an investiture controversy. To protect his interest, Henry IV invaded Italy and deposed Pope Gregory VII. The Concordat of Worms, I know it looks like worms, but it's German, so the W is pronounced like a V, it's Worms, was attempted to resolve the problem with the compromise, but there was a struggle for control between secular and spiritual leaders in this investiture controversy. The best way for you to understand this investiture controversy is to watch this short clip. You won't be sorry. I mean, it really totally explains what happened, and it just makes so much sense. Okay, so moving on. The Crusades. The Crusades were wars to regain Holy Land from the Muslims, and they signaled increased vitality and self-confidence of Western Europe. Pope Urban II declared the First Crusade in 1095 at the Council of Clermont. It was part of the motivation was to channel Europe's warrior aggression to Christianity's use. Another part of that, honestly, was to get land. We talk about the Crusades in the noble spreading of religion, but think about what these people were doing at the time. Yes, spreading Christianity was important to them, but so was also expanding their kingdom. Why was expanding their kingdom important? Because that gave them more authority, more power, and more money. So there's that. So Pope Urban declared the First Crusade. And as I said, part of that motivation was to channel this warrior aggression and use it for Christianity's sake. The Crusades were part of the general European expansion, but met stiff Islamic resistance. The Muslim leaders called for jihad, which is holy war. So basically, holy war, right? Crusades were the Christian holy war, jihad, Islamic holy war. Same thing, different name. In 1291, almost 2 centuries after Pope Urban's appeal, the last Christian strongholds in the Near East fell. The Crusades remain a crucial part of the ideology of contemporary Islamic extremists today. And that's why it's important to know, I think, about these things, because these days when we hear so much about Islamic extremists, we sometimes don't take time to cipher out or to put that word in, extremist, and we just kind of get this stereotype that could be wrong. So we need to, that's why we need to understand these things. So Pope Innocent III, the papal theocracy reached its zenith under him. Innocent III asserted papal authority over the princes of Europe and used his power to excommunicate people who disagreed. The theological and political positions put forth in the Fourth Lateran Council, which was convened in 1215, they argued that the Eastern Orthodox Church was subordinate to the Roman Catholic Church because The Roman Catholic Church was there first. They prohibited states from taxing the clergy, and the Fourth Lateran Council also decreed that the body and blood of Christ are present in the sacrament of the Eucharist. So what exactly does that mean? So we're talking about communion, okay? So if you have experience with communion, you know that there's generally, in terms of Christianity, communion is some sort of flat unleavened bread or cracker with wine or grape juice representing wine. This Fourth Lateran Council, with this decree, says that those things are the actual body and blood of Christ in that ceremony, that they become those actual things in the communion ceremony. So I told you that we would also mention the Jewish people here, the Jewish religion. Medieval Christians were becoming increasingly anti-Jewish. Remember, we've talked in the past. Christians were becoming pretty much anti-anything Christian. So the Jews were attacked and persecuted very often with compliance and support of monarchs, lords, and clergy. The Jews were denounced on theological grounds and resented for their economic activities. It's something that's a stereotype that has stuck with Jewish culture today. When you want to negotiate a price with someone at a flea market, you may hear the term Jew. You're going to try to Jew them down. That's where this comes from. And it's a derogatory term. So just use the word negotiate, because that's really what you mean. The Fourth Lateran Council barred Jews from holding public office and required them to wear a badge. So if you've ever read the Scarlet Letter, think about it kind of like that. In terms of Christian art, literature, and religious teachings, they all identified Jews with Satan, which terrified Christians. Remember, Christianity is still fairly new at this time. And so people want to be good. They want to maintain this religion, and they're terrified to be near anything associated with Satan. The Jews maintained their faith, continued to develop their traditions of biblical and legal scholarship, and contributed substantially to medieval culture throughout the Middle Ages.